Welcome, O Tarnished One. The task that lies ahead is great, yes. Find the great runes, brandish the Elden Ring, and restore the Golden Order. But before you move along, why not rest here for a moment and learn of the great history of this land, of aeons long forgotten, of dragons and giants that ruled the land, of the first Elden Lord and Queen Marika and the champion Radagon, and of course the event that brought you here, the Shattering. Oh, you wish to know? Very well then, lend me your ear. Our journey began aeons before, when perhaps nothing but the god of this universe existed. We can only speculate from the limited information we have about what happened and in what order during that time. Hieta, the Maiden of the Three Fingers, calls it the Great One and informs us, the Tarnished, that all life sprung like water from it. All that there is came from the One Great, then came fractures and births and souls. But the Great One isn't responsible for the proliferation of life in the world, and generally speaking good, but for evil, sin, pain, and misery. But the Greater Will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. The Great Will is one of the outer gods, though never referred to in such a manner in-game. It is an entity that exerts great influence on the land. We will see later how it is responsible for the Elden Ring, and how it communicates through the two fingers. But for now, we are facing another problem. Hieta's narrative leads us to believe the Greater Will is responsible for the fracture of the Great One, but Hieta serves the Three Fingers and the Frenzied Flame, so her words are likely twisted. This is more logical since everything came from the Great One, that the Greater Will and similarly the Frenzied Flame, which represents order and chaos respectively, were the result of the Great One's fracture, not the cause. Hieta also ominously tells us that life must make a complete circle, and that for everyone to be rid of suffering and find salvation, all must become one again. Life as we know it must cease, and the Great One must be made again, an ending that of course serves the Frenzied Flame. And so, what was borrowed must be returned. Melt it all away with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again. It was around that time that the Greater Will sent to the lands between, through a golden star, the Elden Beast, who is the true form of the Elden Ring, and the manifestation of the concept of order, which the Greater Will desires. If the Greater Will was indeed responsible for the destruction of the Great One, then it probably did it through the Elden Beast. But if the fracture of the Great One occurred at an earlier time, then the Elden Beast served as a keeper of order in the land. Following the genesis of the world, we enter the second epoch, Prehistory, the time when life slowly emerges from something we can call a proto-Erdtree, which the game calls Crucible. And then the Erdtree began to grow, slowly spreading its roots across the world, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. Wielding red lightning as a weapon, and with scales made of sharp gravel stones, ancient dragons were the dominant life form of this era. Floating in the sky was their capital city of Farum Azula, from where the Dragon Lord Placidusax exerted his control. But the dragons were not alone in their empire. After tens of thousands of years, the Beastmen gained intelligence. They lived with and served their draconic masters at Farum Azula, developing an advanced and sophisticated civilization that can still be seen in the ruins of the crumbling floating city. Alas, nothing lasts forever, so the end came for the ancient dragon dynasty as well. The city was hit by a meteorite, which could perhaps be the golden star that carried the Elden Beast, depending on where on the timeline one wished to place this event. The Dragon Lord Placidusax decided to leave, with the dragons waiting in vain for his return. Now at the heart of the storm beyond time, Placidusax lies entombed, awaiting his god's return, in the hopes of restoring the Dragon Order to its ancient glory, while the jewel of his empire, the royal city of Farum Azula, continues to crumble to dust. But dragons were not the only life form that lived in the lands between during that time frame. After chasing away the ice dragons that had made the snowy mountains of the north their home, the fire giants carved out their own kingdom. The giants drew their strength from the power of the fell god, tending to the flame of their forge that enabled them to make strong weapons, for it is said that the fire giants invented smithing. Some unspecified time later, humans came to live in the mountains next to the fire giants. These were the first astrologers who preceded the sorcerers, and are likely the predecessors of the Carians and the Lucarians. But not all neighbours of the giants were friendly, for the Zamor, a race of warriors who clad themselves in icy winds, were the sworn enemies of the fire giants and fought with them since time immemorial. The first human civilizations that flourished before the time of the Erdtree were in the underground region between the rivers Siofra and Ainsel, which flow beneath the lands between. Here we can see the remnants of the Ul Palace, full of mausoleums and statues, evidence of an ancient and advanced human kingdom, and the Grand Cloister, where human lords served the god of the Scarlet Rot, until a blind swordsman with a flowing sword sealed the god away at the Lake of Rot. During an unspecified time, but still before the Erdtree, the Nox were banished by the Greater Will deep underground as punishment for a horrible act, and to cut them off from the source of their power, the night sky. From the item description of the Fingerslayer blade, we can make an educated guess of what that act was. The hidden treasure of the eternal city of Nokron, a blade said to have been born of a corpse. This blood-drenched fetish is proof of the high treason committed by the eternal city, and symbolizes its downfall. Cannot be wielded by those without a fate, but is said to be able to harm the Greater Will and its vassals. It seems that the Nox, in their desire to bring the Age of Stars, turned against the Greater Will and planned on killing the Greater Will's two fingers with a blade made out of a corpse. And so, Astel, natural born of the Void, which the game calls a malformed star, descended from the skies by order of the Greater Will and destroyed the Eternal City. Forced underground, the Nox founded the Eternal Cities of Nokstella and Nokron, and there they awaited the coming of their Lord and Saviour under a false night sky, the Lord of Night, who will herald the arrival of the Age of the Stars. It is now time to introduce one of, if not the, most important characters in the lore of Elden Ring, besides you, unnamed Tarnish One, and that is Marika. Marika was of the race of Numen, who came from a land far from the Lands Between, some ages ago, and she was chosen by the Two Fingers as an Empyrean. At roughly the same time, perhaps a bit earlier, the warrior Horelo waged countless wars against warrior clans with his Crucible Knights to prove himself the strongest, and he was quite successful. Upon witnessing Horelo's battle prowess, Marika married him. He became her first consort, and assumed the name Godfrey and the title of the First Elden Lord. To keep up with his new lordly image, Godfrey took the Beast Regent Sarosh upon his back to suppress his ceaseless lust for battle. With that said, Godfrey had by no means become a pacifist. Indeed, he would pursue many wars on Marika's and the Erdtree's behalf. The Erdtree, which had sprung from the Crucible by that time and was the embodiment of order, was in perilous danger, since everyone who wasn't serving it was against it. We know that he fought the Stormlord and constructed Stormvale Castle, successfully besieged Castle Morn, and of course led the war against the Fire Giants. The Fire Giants were no easy opponents, and their defeat only came due to the combined efforts of both Marika and Godfrey, who personally fought in the war, as well as the betrayal of the Trolls, who turned against the Giants and the Knights of Zamor. This was the war that allowed for the Age of the Erdtree to finally begin. In Marika's own words, "Hark, brave warriors, hark, my lord Godfrey, we commend your deeds. Guidance has delivered ye through ordeal to the place ye stand. Put the giants to the sword and confine the flame atop the mount. Let a new epoch begin, an epoch glistening with life. Brandish the Elden Ring for the Age of the Erdtree." And Godfrey did just that. The Fire Giants were all but one slain. The last giant standing was cursed by Queen Marika to forever tend to the undying fire of the Forge, so as not to pose a threat to the Erdtree. O trifling giant, mayst thou tend thy flame for eternity. Marika is also said to have killed the god of the Fire Giants, the Fell God, as it is named, though we know this was not true and that it lurked within the Fire Giants themselves. Following their victory over the Fire Giants, Godfrey and Marika established the Order of the Fire Monks to keep watch over the Flame of Ruin. and thus the Age of the Erdtree began. The early years of the new era were an age of plenty, and Godfrey's reign was successful. He and Marika had children, demigods, known as the Golden Lineage, consisting of Morgoth, Mog, Godwyn and Godric. Godfrey opened arenas, where warriors battled each other to satisfy his lust for combat. Yet despite this era being a golden age for the Erdtree, it was not without turbulence either. During this time, we see the rise of the Glomide Queen, an Empyrean chosen by the Two Fingers to lead the Godskin Apostles. Dressed in robes made out of patches of smooth skin, and having assimilated inhuman physiology, the Apostles hunted down and killed gods and demigods using the Black Flame incantation. Amon, one of the fire monks who had been tasked with confining the flame of ruin of the fire giants, turned traitor and joined the Glomide Queen's forces, swearing fealty to the god-slaying Black Flame. Yet their heresy would not last long, for Malekith, Marika's shadow-bound beast, sealed destined death, and the power of the Black Flame was lost. Having sealed the Rune of Death, Malekith was tasked with guarding it. Having defeated the Glomide Queen and confined Death, the Golden Order was established, and Marika became the one true god. Around this time, the descendants of the Eternal founded the sorcery town of Celia above the Eternal City of Nokron. Remember how earlier in the video we mentioned the astrologers, the likely predecessors of the Carians and the Lucarians? Well, it's time for us to leave Godfrey and Marika for a while and turn our focus to that part of the lands between. For while Godfrey was beating people in his arena, a young astrologer gazed at the night sky as she walked, meeting the full moon and becoming a queen. This was Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon. With the power of the full moon and her lunar magic, she bewitched the Academy of Rhea Lucaria, and with the strength of the Glintstone Knights, established the Royal House of Caria. Her Glintstone Knights were very few in number, but the lunar magic imbued in their swords allowed them to wield sorcerous battle skills and make them a match for even the champions of gold. To further boost the strength of her elite knight regiment, Rennala called upon the trolls, who swore fealty to her. Rennala and the Carian military might still held true when the forces of the Erdtree clashed with them in the First and Second Liurnian Wars. It is there that we are introduced to a formidable champion that came seemingly out of the blue, but forever changed the history of the lands between, Radagon of the Golden Order. Though Radagon's campaign into Liurnia of the Lakes during the First War was successful, the Second conflict had no victor. The Second Liurnian War. No victory for the Golden, nor for the Moon. No prize but atonement, the birth of a vow. This vow was the marriage of Radagon to Rennala at the Church of Vows. From Miriel, the steward of the Church of Vows, we learn that Lord Radagon was a great champion, possessed of flowing red locks. He came to these lands at the head of a great golden host when he met Lady Rennala in battle. He soon repented his territorial aggressions, though, and became husband to the Carian Queen. Radagon once cleansed himself with celestial dew, repented his territorial aggressions, and swore his love to Rennala. The Order of the Erdtree and the fate of the Moon were conjoined, and all the wounds of war forgiven. Upon their union, the couple exchanged gifts. Rennala offered Radagon a Dark Moon greatsword, while Radagon forged the Golden Order greatsword. Made out of light, just like the Elden Ring itself, the weapon proudly symbolized the tenets of the Golden Order, and was given to Rennala, though one day it would find itself back in Radagon's hands. The union of Radagon and Rennala brought reconciliation between the two factions, and the couple had 3 children, Radan, Ricard and Ranni. During the Dragon War, the royal capital of Leinduel was attacked by the great ancient dragon Gransax, who managed to breach the city's walls. The dragons proved to be formidable opponents for the Tree Sentinels, who realized that their faith-based magic was not enough to protect them, and that they had to resort to extreme measures to prevail. From the descriptions of the malformed dragon helm and the dragon Greatclaw, we read that after the great ancient dragon Gransax attacked, the Sentinels had an epiphany. The only way to truly protect the Erdtree was to become dragons themselves. Another passage describes a weapon said to have been whittled from the claw of a great ancient dragon, wielded by grotesque tree sentinels who yet serve the Erdtree. This claw is enwreathed with lightning and tears through the dragon's feeble descendants with ease. From the sword monument of the Altus Plateau, we learn that Godwyn the Golden fought during this war, routing the dragons due to his martial prowess and earning the friendship of the dreaded dragon Fortisax. However, a far more significant event in the history of the Lands Between was the tarnishment and exile of Elden Lord Godfrey. From Melina, we learn that Marika was the one who took Godfrey's grace and cursed him. "My lord and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed, ye will be driven from the Lands Between. Ye will wage war in a land afar, where ye will live and die. Then, after thy death, I will give back what I once claimed. Return to the Lands Between, wage war, and brandish the Elden Ring. Grow strong in the face of death, warriors of my lord, Lord Godfrey." And thus Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, was robbed of his grace and became tarnished. He took with him his soldiers and kinfolk and left the Lands Between. After the long march south came to an end, Godfrey renounced his title and lived as a simple warrior once more. Before we move on with the story, we must first mention a few events that happened before the hounding of Godfrey. Morg and Morgott, Marika's accursed omen twins, kept imprisoned far underground below Leyndell, were growing up. But despite his dark fate, Morgott loved the Erdtree and aspired to become its protector. Thus, at some point, he was given grace. However, his twin, in typical twin fashion, turned entirely evil, and at one point in time found the Formless Mother. When Morg stood before her, deep underground, his accursed blood erupted with fire, and besotted with the defilement that he was born into. Radahn, Radagon's son, who idolized both his father and Godfrey, travelled to Sellia to study sorcery and gravity magic. Not unlike his father, who had learned sorcery from his wife, the Lunar Queen Rennala. In Sellia, young Radahn learned this type of magic from an Alabaster Lord. This magic came in handy when Radahn defended Sellia from the stars, which is likely a metaphor for a cataclysmic meteor event, and earned the moniker Star Scourge. From the Star Scourge heirloom, we read, "The mightiest hero of the demigods confronted the falling stars alone, and thus did he crush them, his conquest sealing the very fate of the stars." Meanwhile, his little sister Ranni was chosen by the Two Fingers to be an Empyrean, and given Blythe as her shadow-bound half-brother. Rennala led her daughter to meet the Dark Moon and the Snow Witch, from whom Ranni learned ice magic. From the item description of the Snow Witch's robe and the freezing mist, we read, "Once worn by the snowy crone who the young Ranni encountered deep in the woods. She was a witch and well versed in cold sorceries. It is said that the doll that houses Ranni's soul was modelled after her. That old witch was Ranni's secret mentor. The snowy crone taught the young Ranni to fear the dark moon as she imparted her cold sorcery." As for Ricard, we learn that he became Lord of Volcano Manor at an unspecified point in time. He rediscovered the ancient hexes of Gelmir and brought them back into practical use as new forms of sorcery. Following the hounding of Godfrey, Radagon abandoned his wife Rennala, giving her the amber egg that contained the Great Rune as a parting gift. He then returned to Leyndell, where he became Queen Marika's second husband and king consort, taking the title of the second Elden Lord. Nobody knows why Radagon abandoned his first wife, and why he, a mere champion, was chosen by Marika to be her husband. Regardless of the reasoning behind this act, the result was all the same. Queen Rennala was inconsolable. From Miriel we learn that, sadly, her heart was broken when Lord Radagon left her. And then, when the Academy rebelled against the royals, she was locked away in the Grand Library. In the end, Lady Rennala was left alone, cradling the amber egg Lord Radagon bequeathed her. Now she devotes herself to it through forbidden rite, the grim art of reincarnation. Sensing the Queen's weakness, the scholars of the Academy of Rea Lucaria rebelled against her. They imprisoned her inside the Grand Library, swore allegiance to Radagon, and declared war against the rest of the Carian royal family. To fight the forces that remained loyal to Rennala and the Carian royal family, the Academy hired mercenaries, the Cuckoo Soldiers, and equipped them with magically enhanced gear and spells to wage war as they pleased against the royalists. The Cuckoo Knights were successful in the beginning, imprisoning the Troll Knight Bowls and levelling Kingsrealm Manor to the ground. Yet for all the panoply of war they had been bequeathed with, they ultimately failed when they attempted to assault Carian Manor. For as Iji, the Carian blacksmith, informs us, the Carians were taken off guard, but their strength had not waned, and they repelled the knight's onslaught by conjuring an enchanted snare that remains even to this day. After marrying Marika and becoming the second Elden Lord, Radagon had 2 children with her, the twins Malenia and Miquella. But as with Mog and Morgoth, these twins also suffered afflictions from birth, though for different reasons. Miquella was cursed with eternal childhood, while Malenia was afflicted with the rot. Here the weird relationship between Marika and Radagon is revealed to us through the description of the remembrance of the rot goddess. They are the same person. It is really hard to describe it, but Radagon seems to be Marika's male persona, or aspect, given a separate body. Thus their children are born of a single god, and for that they were cursed. Despite their afflictions, Miquella and Malenia were also Empyreans, chosen by their own 2 fingers to become gods and lead the world into a new age. In an effort to cure his sister Malenia of the rot, and to allow himself to grow into an adult, Miquella created the Halik tree. He watered the tree with his own blood ever since it was a sapling, but despite his efforts, he ultimately failed to grow it into an Erdtree. But Miquella wasn't the only Empyrean hatching plans, for Ranni, Renala's daughter, also wanted to escape her fate. She conspired with Numen women, who all had ties to Marika. Ranni stole a fragment of the Rune of Death from Malekith, and imbued the daggers of her co-conspirators with the power of destined death, making the weapons that would kill a demigod. The plan was for Ranni to shed her flesh, the thing that carried the Empyrean curse as she viewed it, but preserve her spirit. For her plan to succeed, another demigod would also have to die. The Numen assassins chose Godwyn the Golden, who had so bravely fought during the Dragon War. On the same night, Ranni offered her brother, Praetor Ricard, the blasphemous Claw, a rock that was engraved with the Rune of Death, so that Ricard would have a fighting chance against Malekith if the plan went south. Arriving at Leyndell, the assassin murdered Godwyn, carving the curse mark of death into his flesh. The curse mark was supposed to have taken the shape of a circle, but because Ranni also perished at the same time, it broke in half. Thus, the Lunar Princess's ritual was completed, with Ranni dying in flesh and Godwyn perishing in soul alone, becoming the first demigod in history to die since Marika's ascension. His body was interred in the Erdtree's roots, where it mutated into a blob, and he would become known as the Prince of Death. Later, the traces of the Rune of Death that had been carved into his body would use the Erdtree's network of roots that spanned the entirety of the lands between, corrupting it and creating the Death Root, the source of those who live in death. The undead that rose created a cult, worshipping Godwyn and believing that one day he would return and lead them. The dragon Fortisax, mourning the passing of his friend, tried to fight the blight that plagued Godwyn's body from within by entering his mind, but this led only to Fortisax being corrupted. Miquella's attempts to offer his half-brother a proper death were also met with failure. On the other hand, now free of the shackles of her Empyrean flesh, Ranni transferred her soul to a doll, modelled after her mentor, the Snow Witch. But Ranni's plot had more profound consequences than anyone could fathom, for Godwyn's death became the catalyst that would lead to the shattering of the Elden Ring. In response to Godwyn's death, his mother, Queen Marika, shattered the Elden Ring using her hammer, which became splintered with rune fragments. Radagon, using the same hammer, attempted to repair it in vain. As punishment for shattering the Order, both Marika and Radagon were imprisoned in the Erdtree, but the damage had already been done. The Golden Order corrupted and weakened, and the demigods, Marika's children, vied for control of the shards, known as the Great Runes, which they had inherited following the Shattering. The Academy of Rea Lucaria was quick to announce its neutrality, with the sorcerers casting repelling seals on the south and east gates that led to the capital. But the children of Marika would wage war against each other. Morgoth became the Lord of Leyndell under the moniker of the Veiled Lord, and protected the Erdtree under the guise of Margit, the Fell Omen. During the first defense of Leyndell, the city was assaulted by Godfrey the Grafted, descendant of Godfrey the First Elden Lord and kin to Godric. However, the defenders were victorious, and the Dragon Knight Kristoff captured Godfrey, a heroic act that earned him an Erdtree burial. The remains of that army would move on to serve Godric, who had escaped the capital by hiding amongst the womenfolk seeking refuge from Radahn in Stormvale Castle. At some point, Godric found the courage to insult Malenia, but she made quick work of him, and he begged for mercy at her feet. Following this defeat, he too turned to the art of grafting in order to become stronger, and one day returned to the capital. But Leyndell and the Erdtree were still being defended by Morgott, who felled many heroes that were trying to claim the Erdtree and the title of Lord for themselves. Moreover, the Veiled Lord also fought against the Starscourge General Radahn. Leyndell's forces also participated in what was called the most appalling conflict during the Shattering, the assault on Volcano Manor. Praetor Ricard had grown extreme hatred for the Erdtree and the gods, and in his blasphemous ambition declared war against the gods themselves. Naturally, the armies of Leyndell that had sworn to protect the Erdtree marched to stop Ricard. It is said that the squalid, the sick, and the blasphemous participated in this never-ending battle until Ricard's gluttonous blasphemy became so great that even his own followers became disillusioned with their lord and began abandoning him, searching for a way to kill their master to prevent him from bringing further dishonor upon himself. Ricard had fed himself to the serpent that dwelt on Mount Gelmir, merging with this ancient enemy of the Erdtree, and, having become an abomination, devoured his own champions to assimilate their strength. Alas, all attempts to end Ricard's life were met with failure. Thus it was time for the two strongest demigods to clash their blades, Malenia and Radahn. Leading his Redmane Knights, the Starscourge met the Blade of Miquella and her undefeated Cleanrot Knights south of Celia in a region that is now known as the Swamp of Ionia. The great battle that ensued was fought to a standstill, as the two were equals in combat. The stalemate was broken when Malenia unleashed her power of rot, killing many of the participants and infecting Radahn, who would become mad as a dog, aimlessly wandering the battlefield and devouring the corpses of those who fell during the battle, whether friend or foe. But the use of this power also cost Malenia dearly, for she entered a comatose state. It was thanks to the bravery of the Cleanrot Knight Finlay that Malenia survived. One of the few survivors of the battle, the knight carried the slumbering Malenia back to the Halictree, fending off all manner of foes by herself. However, the Halictree had, by that point, become but a husk, for Miquella was no longer there to take care of it. He had embedded himself in the Halictree, but before this process could be finished, his half-brother Mog, Lord of Blood, kidnapped him. Mog, who had gained power from the outer god known as the Formless Mother, carved open the tree and took Miquella's infant form deep underground. There he planned to raise the Empyrean to full godhood, become his consort and begin a new dynasty. Still, no matter how much blood he drenched over Miquella's cocoon to facilitate this awakening, Miquella remained unresponsive. Unbeknownst to Mog, Miquella had stripped himself from his flesh and his golden lineage and had travelled to the land of Shadow. The demigods, failing to become the Elden Lord and weakened by their infighting, were abandoned by the Greater Will, who renounced them and turned its gaze to the Tarnished, those who long ago had lost their grace along with Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. Its grace was extended to them, fulfilling Marika's prophetic words that what she once took, she would in time return it. They are now called to the lands between to claim the Great Runes and become the next Elden Lord, restoring the Golden Order. Or perhaps they intend a different fate. We are planning to cover the battles of many other fantasy, sci-fi and space opera universes, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.